Morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Give us one more minute. We're going to let a few more people log in, and then we'll get started. Good morning. My name is Garrett Sheehan. I'm President and CEO of the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce, and we've done this a few times now, and it seemed to work out really well. Just a question and answer session here with the chambers. We have our panel again. We'll get started in just a moment. I want to thank our sponsors, especially Connecticut Natural Gas, Southern Connecticut Gas, and UI, who are doing so much to support us during this time so that we can provide business assistance to the entire community, and also all of our major investors who help us throughout the year to allow us to put on this type of programming, both at the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce and especially with the Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce as well. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel. We have Ann Benowitz with both chambers and leads our economic development programs, Dee Pryor-Nesty, Executive Director at the Quinnipiac Chamber, and Joe Williams with the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. So Joe, maybe we'll start with you because we've talked so much about the PPP program, the economic injury disaster loans. Things I would say have generally seemed to move more smoothly of late, but there's still a lot of questions out there and people that are facing challenges with it.
Oh, great. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, things are going a little bit smoother. Just got an update this morning with the new numbers as far as the PPP is concerned and what the EIDL has been doing. I think right now under the new program, I think we've put out with the new Paycheck Protection Plan, 186 billion in that program, and over 2 million small businesses have been approved for that. Anyone on the line that is still waiting on their EIDL that maybe applied back in March, in particular, anyone that has the loan number beginning in the 2000s range, if you have not heard from the SBA, you need to go into the Express system and reapply. You may get a message saying that you're not eligible and it's only open to the agricultural business at the time. You need to overlook that. Let myself know. I have a special email that we just received this morning to a woman at the SBA that will handle your application, because what they're trying to do is merge all the old applications in the 2000s and put you at the top of the list by merging, but you need to go back in if you have not yet heard from the SBA or received your advance. If you have received your advance, because those advances went out on May the 3rd, they are getting to you. We do have 4 million applications in the system. I do believe they processed, I think, the first million of that 4 million as of this week. The SBA is working 7 days a week to try to get all of those loans looked at. So if you do have a loan number in, say, the 3,000, beginning with 3, you are going to get a look at. Just understand the federal government is actually spreading out the money. I mean, the average PPP loan was around 200,000 in the first wave. In phase 2, the average is more around $74,000, $75,000. So that is how individual small businesses that can be helped going forward. So just be aware of that. There has been some new guidelines, and there's been several questions. When do I bring my employees back? You know, what about they don't want to return back to work, things of that nature. I will encourage everyone to please visit the SBA.gov's website. Every day, the new guidelines on the CARES Act are uploaded, and they're constantly updating and really giving you a clarity of the rules of engagement. It's a concern in Washington. I know it's a concern here in the state of Connecticut. You know, can my loan, will it be forgiven? How much it will be forgiven? How do I qualify? What disqualifies me? Which are all great questions. And you should take the time out. The financial institution that you receive the dollars from, you should stay directly in contact with them, because partly they have to recommend to SBA whether or not your PPP should be forgiven and in what manner. So they will calculate that. So you want to make sure that you're following all the rules to that promissory note that you signed for. It is very, very, very important, and be mindful of the June 30th cutoff. There has no been any updates right now coming from Congress. They are in debates right now. They understand when they rushed the legislation into law that they didn't cover all the bases. This is why guidelines are coming out every single day. And you should check at least once a week to see the guidelines, to see if there are any changes. You know, they're talking about possibly extending the time frame of when you can use PPP. It has not been decided yet. They've heard some of the questions regarding, hey, what about, I'm a business that my state's not yet open. We don't think my state will be open, say, until June 1st, you know, but I received my money the first week of May. You know, how do I still qualify or disqualify? So these are things that Congress is looking at, and our president and the SBA and through Treasury. So just be mindful. We will put that correspondence out as soon as we get it. I'll coordinate that with Garrett. And hey, just keep hope alive, you know, basically keep coming to webinars and seminars and going to question and answer. I think this is the best way to get true verified information. I think this is wonderful that we do this on Fridays to give you the latest information that's really coming out of Washington.
Hey, Joe, just a couple of points of clarification. So if someone hasn't applied for EIDL yet, right now it's still closed. They cannot get in the system, right?
They cannot. The only individuals that can go into EIDL are agricultural businesses, I think under Section 18B of the SBA statutes that are done by Congress. Only those businesses, and the definition of those agricultural businesses are actually defined in that and on the SBA.gov's website.
And with that program, I know it's set to run through December. Is it right now that they're just trying to clean up what's in the system before they start taking anything new?
This is the feel of the administration, that of the 4 million applications and the agribusinesses, the money will probably be exhausted. That's why they don't want to open it up to everyone. They're really trying to shift the larger corporations who sent back the money or declined it, that has to go back in the system. The $60 billion that were appropriated in the last stimulus, as you know, if you have gone to your meat counter or your supermarket, we're starting to ration out meat. With Tyson Foods and Smithfield coming down with Corona, President Trump has signed an edict on executive order to make sure those plants stay open, but recognize that there are several hundred people that have COVID in these plants. So production has slowed down tremendously on the larger meat producers in our country. So we have to just be cognizant of that. And what the federal government is actually doing is saying, hey, we're going to put a hold on new applications. We're going to deal directly with the problem in the US government as far as our meat sourcing is concerned. Let's get through the 4 million applications and then we'll revisit. Also, what's happening right now in DC is they're looking at the next stimulus package. We don't know what exactly was in it. The Senate has just come back in session, like many of us, wearing masks and trying to figure out what's next. Is it going to be infrastructure? What are we going to do for hospitals and schools? How are we preparing for the school systems in the fall? How is every state opening up? We have 31 states opening up this week, you know, but here in New England, from Delaware north, you know, we're doing a more collective type of thing, much like California, where it's going to be phased in. How is that? The White House has put out its 14-day rules of how you should open. I know Governor Lamont, he made an announcement on April 30th of how he wants to see certain things. I know the meeting on the 20th with his advisory committee will be talking about how will we open in the state of Connecticut. So you have to be mindful of all this and think strategically like now. And I encourage all businesses to really sit down. If you need help, call your local chamber, call Garrett, reach out to myself or Dee or to anyone else on this call. Just to say, let's walk through the process. Because what I don't want to happen is that we get to June or into July and you're looking for your reimbursement to turn that into a grant and you're denied for a small reason. We're really having a lot of issues for those who are self-employed on the call or 1099s. The PUA, the red dot on the DOL website went live yesterday. So if you weren't able to get into the system like last week or a few days ago, it went officially live yesterday that the $600 extra stimulus payment will go alongside and will be one check or one deposit.
Thanks. Dee, anything that you're hearing, particularly from members over the last week or so?
Well, several are concerned that they don't feel they're ready to reopen. Hair salons in particular. I think one hair salon, I won't mention their name, is actually listening, but she's very, very concerned about opening and because hair salons obviously work very, very close together, not only with your client, but with the chairs next to you. She doesn't feel that they're ready, and she doesn't feel the guidelines are clear. So it is concerning and confusion out there. I know that she's not alone in that feeling.
Yeah, and as you know, I'm on the governor's advisory panel, and definitely have heard that a lot of people are concerned on the hair salon side. I think why that field got on the list is just because they're looking out and seeing how many layoffs have occurred in just the hair industry overall, so including the barbershops and other areas. I know it is difficult. I mean, I think everyone understands, even if you're allowed to reopen, doesn't mean you have to reopen, but that does create a difficult situation if your competitor reopens or you have your employees who want to get back to work. And so that doesn't make that a simple choice. We do expect to get later today or early next week some specific guidelines as to how hair salons, barbershops should operate. So state as to how to be safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anne, maybe I'll turn to you, and what are some of the topics you've been hearing over the last week?
So many questions about restaurants and how they're going to open. I had a very interesting call yesterday from someone from Stamford who wanted to know, is there anything that we can do from a sort of certification perspective to help people feel safer in these restaurants? And, we've heard advice from many folks in both the state and the city levels of government saying, signage is really important. Let people really communicate to people and help them understand exactly what you are doing to be proactive. Communicate it on your website and make sure that people, even in your staff, can communicate that to others. So it's going to be, of course, there's going to be masks and there's going to be proper distancing, but some restaurants I hear are setting up outside to, sort of put up different ways of separating people. So some are putting up like a tent and they're separating them by actual, screens. So, there are lots of different creative ideas out there, but that's one thing I'm hearing. And the other thing is, I'm hearing discussion about, some of the folks in economic development are concerned about the status of some of the projects out there. A lot of these engineering and architectural companies and design companies are just kind of waiting to understand what the status is. And so the Economic Development Committee on Wednesday morning at 8:30, this is my plug for the committee, is going to have a Zoom call and discuss, with all of the economic development directors, as many who can make it, the status of the projects that are in each town, so that each town gets an opportunity to, just let people know where we are and what to do. So if there are different kinds of, documentation that need to be had or, applied for or whatever, they'll know how to do that process. So that's pretty much what I'm hearing. And there are some other things that are coming out. I know that you're hearing a lot, Garrett, from the reopen perspective, so we can, I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go
I can
on.
jump on the some of the restaurant questions. I think the restaurants is challenging. As it stands right now, the May 20th would allow for outdoor dining, but that doesn't work for every restaurant, and we've tried to express that up the chain that not every restaurant is. And even if they have some outdoor dining, that doesn't mean that it lends itself to a lot of it. I know towns, I know the city of New Haven and many other towns are looking at regulations to allow for more outdoor dining, to kind of expand the space that restaurants would have to address that. What I have seen, and again, this was just draft, but I think there will be a kind of self-service state certification program, just that you went through the guidelines. And by doing that, you can get approved and then promote yourself as having, being following the guidelines. So that was in one of the draft proposals. So I do think that'll be there, as well as some of the things from a signage standpoint that to put out there, and because signage will be important. That we could open everything and no one will show up if they don't feel safe. And so a big part of everything that we want to do on reopen is to have safety as number one, and also restore confidence that people believe that it's safe to go out, so that they're willing to populate these restaurants. So it's key, obviously, that the business owners follow the guidelines, but then also that they let people know that they're doing it. And I think the most important thing I could say about the guidelines is, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to common sense, masks, and keeping distance between people as much as possible. We've all been to the grocery store, other stores. Our business community is innovative, and they're going to come up with things that work for their exact physical location to keep both customers and employees safe. And so even when the guidelines come out, I think what you're going to still find, if you're a business owner out there who's looking at opening on May 20th, it's still going to come down to common sense ideas and looking at your own business and how you make it work. I know there's been some questions, and Ann and I talked about this. Joe, you might be able to jump in. A lot of more questions this week about if the PPP loans, if those expenses would be deductible on taxes. Originally, there was a thought that they were, and now we're hearing that they cannot be deducted, the expenses that are covered by the PPP loan. We talked to some accountants, still an area where there's a lot of gray, and they're trying to understand the particulars of it. Even seen in Congress that several senators were upset with that interpretation by the IRS. So definitely not something set in stone. But Joe, have you heard anything on this tax side of PPP?
I haven't gotten a full answer on some guidelines on that. I actually just wrote that down, so I'll send a message up to the SBA, see if we can get some clarity on that.
And I know I just fell into the trap of using acronyms. So we're talking about Paycheck Protection Program. This is the loan that converts to a grant. Even though we're deep into this, we still don't want to get into talking with all three letters
Right.
acronyms here.
And Garrett, I just want to add to that. I want to just support what Joe said before about checking the SBA website, and we've got this on our website as well, because the SBA is constantly updating their guidelines for this exact reason. It's a perfect example of, you know, knowing and understanding that this is not a perfect piece of legislation. You know, this was put together very quickly for everybody's benefit, but it's going to have to be, you know, discussed and you know, refined a little bit as we go along, because of these kinds of things that pop up that, you know, were just unexpected. I think the other thing is the forgiveness, Joe, maybe because that's another thing I was hearing about, if you don't mind, Garrett. You know, can you maybe just describe that a little bit and that process? Because I am getting questions about, you know, what that looks like. What can people expect?
Regarding the Paycheck Protection Plan's forgiveness, you really need to check with your bank. Your bank controls your forgiveness, not the SBA. So you have to understand that they set the rules when you sign that promissory note. It is very strict language in your promissory note that you must follow. So you have kind of the looser guidelines at the federal government when it first came out. But remember, the SBA is not the one giving you the loan. It is the bank that is giving you the loan. It is the bank that will request to the SBA for the forgiveness. So in the language of the promissory note, and I've read some of them, it is some strict guidelines to follow.
Okay.
One biggest one you must remember, 75% of the PPP dollars must be expended for payroll expenses exclusively. That is the first criteria. If you don't meet that, it will remain a loan. And you have to be mindful, the Paycheck Protection Plan is a 2-year loan. It's not like the EIDL where it's 30 years, it's 2 years. And you have to understand that in some of the guidelines, if you don't meet all the measurements, doesn't mean that it's just the whole package will be a loan. There's guidelines in the language, and it's per your bank on how much will be forgivable.
Right.
And so say in the instance, I'll give you a good example. I didn't bring all my employees back all at once because we're not yet open. I was waiting on the 20th, but I just received my dollars this week. Well, there is language in your promissory note and as a calculation that your bank is going to use come June 20th to see if you've met 1 to 75% threshold and have you brought all your employees back. And understanding the circumstances that we know that all business weren't be able to go back in full stride all of a sudden. Some things I've actually even spoken to some of my businesses that I consult with is that, hey, maybe it may be best if you want to expend the dollars that you pay your employees, even if they're not at work. They're still on your payroll. They're still now employed. They're no longer furloughed. So that if you're really concerned about, is this loan going to be 100% forgivable, you have to be mindful of the 8 weeks. That's etched in stone. And unless Congress changes it, you really have to understand the language of the PPP guidelines. And with that, the banks are making that determination on a case-by-case basis on how they're handling it. You can look on the SBA website or on Treasury's website to read the guidelines specifically as they're coming out as it relates. Because on a daily basis, they are answering questions. So today, maybe one answer, and come Monday or Tuesday, they may have spoken about it the weekend, they've come to a consensus, and now they'll upload information and they'll share it with us. As it stands right now, the minimum is the 75% rule of utilizing it over that 8-week period of time to qualify for forgiveness at the 100%. So mindful that 25% of this loan is on expenses such as lease and utilities and things of that nature. That the 75% has to go toward payroll. If you are in debate right now on this call of wondering, how do I bring my employees back? Maybe you're trying to do it in a staggered basis. I would encourage each and every one of you to call your bank institution so that you're having an open dialogue with them. And so you're actually setting up really a plan and a roadmap so you're not blindsided when they come to you with the full rules and say, why didn't you follow A, B, and C? It was in your promissory note. Very important.
That's a good point. And I know it's uncomfortable for employers to pay people to be at home. Not that that just flies in the face of what we do, but that really is when the PPP program was originally planned. That was the idea, was to hit a pause on the economy while we dealt with the pandemic. And if that meant people were at home, then that is what they were trying to do. So I know I get a lot of questions about that, but there's nothing wrong with that. And that does, if that means that keeps your business going, and then also you're able to cover some of these other expenses while it's happening, and it's not as disruptive as having your employees be furloughed or laid off, that is at least one solution that's out there. I saw another question about the hair salons, and definitely not trying to give it short shrift. But there was a question in there about if employees could still get unemployment, and that's definitely the case. Just because a sector can be open, unemployment comes down to whether the individual business is open, and if you're hiring back those employees. So if any business decides, that right now there's not enough business to be open and stays closed, then your employees are still eligible for unemployment. It's only if you offer them a job to come back and then they decline to take that job. There's probably a lot of gray area in there as well. It doesn't mean you have to, if you think there's a lot of concern about them coming back to work, you don't have to offer them that job if you're concerned about health and safety yourself at the workplace. So, but I can definitely address those questions offline as well. One thing I want to say on the advisory committee that I'm on, we're just representing businesses, and we're bringing these concerns because I do know that I've heard from lots of hair salons across the entire state that are really concerned about opening up. I'm not sure that I've heard from a hair salon that wants to open up, to be honest with you. I'm sure there are some, but the vast majority of what I've seen is hair salons that don't want to open up. Yeah. And so it's definitely a concern out there. I think that it's just that entire field is so vast and took in so many different types of barbershops, different establishments. If I had to guess, that's why the health experts said okay, because they saw that the economic impact was extremely high. But again, I know it creates an awkward situation if you decide not to open and your competitor does open, or if you have employees that want to get back to work. But that choice still remains with you. There was also in there a question about PPE. Everything we talk about in every establishment, whether it's a hair salon or a restaurant, it's going to come down to people having masks, the employees and the customers. And there is going to be some expectation on employers to make sure that they have those mass resources. You can go to our website. There are several companies now that are selling masks, hand sanitizer. I don't think that the market has fully caught up with what the demand is, or where the demand may be in a couple of weeks as more things start to reopen. But it's definitely a better situation than it was a few weeks ago, as far as your ability to purchase masks and other items. So I know the state is also looking at ways that they can procure more and put that out there, because it's definitely going to be an issue as you get into this. But if you go to our website, we do have a link to a couple of those companies that have hand sanitizer, have other products, including masks. One question on the restaurants too that I saw, when will they be able to open indoor dining? I don't have a date on that. The sense I get from the health experts is that they want to see, let's reopen some things and see how that goes. And if that goes well and we don't get a big spike, then we can open more stuff. So I would see that as a next phase. I think in general, it's a 3 to 4 week time period to kind of see what the effects are of the first phase of opening things. It gets very difficult in deciding what types of things open, but it's based off of what the health experts see as the risk, and then also the employment benefits. And if you're on the wrong side of that, I know that doesn't always make a lot of sense, or I've definitely heard from a lot of gym owners who have said, hey, we can operate at 25%. We could be safer than a hair salon. And I know those are difficult conversations. If there was one kind of overarching theme that I would say about why the state is making certain decisions versus others, I think it's just that they feel as though they can't open everything, because then if we do have a spike, then they're going to have to close everything. And so which would be devastating to have things reopen and then get back into a closing situation. And so those always end up being really difficult decisions on individual companies. Dee, I'll throw it back to you, see if you have questions.
Yes, Joe, I know you answered some of this, but we have a member that would be interested in hearing about the specifics about how the calculation for PPP loan forgiveness works. I know you mentioned that, but specifically how FTEs, full-time equivalents, are calculated. What base period of time is the 8 weeks compared to in terms of payroll costs and FTEs?
Okay, if you remember when you first applied for your PPP, your pay protection plan to your bank, on the first page, they were taking a series of 12 weeks from last year, 2019, and the loan was based on that calculation 2.5 times that number. So that is your base calculation. All right, there's no new calculation. That is the base calculation. What you need to do is take that number, and 75% of the loan that you received must go toward payroll for payroll related expenses. That is how you're going to be calculated and judged whether you're going to receive 100% forgivable loan. Is based on, did you spend over that 8 week period of time from the time that it was dispersed to you. This is another confusion which I want to definitely clear up. It is from the time that you were dispersed, your clock begins. So those who receive, that the first week of May, it's going to take you all the way into June 30th. So the way the program was actually designed was to really get as much of the PPP money out as possible by May 1st or the first week of May, which would give you 8 weeks that when June 30th came, you could say, okay, I spent a large portion, if not all, of my PPP, but minimally, you need to spend 75% of it on payroll for it to be fully 100% forgivable. There are guidelines by each institution which talks about partial forgiveness, which be mindful of that, because this week they've talked about that several different institutions, and some of the calls I was on, they talked about partial forgiveness and how does someone qualify. Maybe I only spend 70%. Well, that means you're not going to get 100% forgiveness. And then they've been clear about that the threshold for 100%, you must spend 75% of your PPP toward payroll. And it kind of is calculated downward. I would encourage you to call your bank institution where you received the loan from and ask them specifically what are their guidelines and what are they using as a calculation, because you may not find it across the board to be the same.
And Dee, I think were you asking in reference, there was a question here about tips and how they apply to PPP. And so Joe, I think you just covered that too, that even if people are receiving more tips now, the loan is already in place from PPP. So if your people are receiving more tips because they're now open, that's not changing anything from the loan or grant.
No, I would use the base period. I had this come up with a couple of large restaurants this week because they received a very large sum of money. And they were trying to figure out how can they spend that over 8 week period of time. And we talked a little bit about bonuses that were due to management. They've spoke a little bit about the overtime that they were running into that calculated their last year's number. And now they're opening up a little slower. How is that going to really affect them? And then we've also spoke about the possibility of giving, temporary raises, hazard duty on top of your payroll, just to exhaust over that 8 week period of time. So what I'm encouraging everyone to do is think a little bit creative, think a little bit out the box. Just know that the government has given you an opportunity to not have to worry about certain expenses, up to 25% of your PPP, and has allowed you to bring all of your employees back to work, or at least back to the payroll. And for those who that will refuse because, till July 31st, there is the extra $600 in some restaurants and hair salons, 20 now. They may not want to come back to work. Well, I can tell you from reading the guidelines and sending the message from Treasury and DOL, you as an employer, if you decide to open and your employees are furloughed, you are the one that needs to offer them their job back if you have a PPP. The whole purpose of the Paycheck Protection Plan was we have over 30 million Americans on collecting unemployment. We're trying to lessen that number. We're over almost 15% unemployment in our country. The whole purpose of the PPP was to, at some time over a 6 to 8 week period of time, that number would lessen and not become greater, because it's really having a significant impact on our economy. So in essence, what the government has done is that we're putting the onus on you to create it as a loan, where we're giving you a mechanism as an employer to turn it into a grant. But we think that, and this was calculated, and talking about the CARES Act, that they said, we knew this was going to take 45 days. We looked at China, looked at Italy and other countries where it took the peak, takes 45 days. Well, we're very near to that. That's why many states are starting to open. And it's going to be that slow, gradual 25% of each state's economy will probably open. It's going to be very selective type of industries and businesses, and those employees or employers which are deemed essential. And that's what the first phase is we're looking at. And we'll track the 14 days of, are we getting any more new cases? How is the PPE ratio, the protective gear? Do we have the software in place that can track individuals through your cell phones of you brushed into someone that has the virus, and then an alert will go out for those individuals. So there's like 6 or 7 criteria that the Advisory Council that Garrett is speaking of in Governor Vermont has put out, and you can go to the state of Connecticut's website to actually see what those are and what the thinking of the governor and how he plans to roll this out. It will not be immediate. We do know, being a state employee, I've been asked, Joe, are you more productive at home or are you more productive at work? That went out in the entire state of Connecticut employee base. We've been told that, this will go into June, that we are not, if we're non-essential, we're not coming back to work until June. We'll all be telecommuting, but if you are essential, you are coming back to work. So those are in DOC, Department of Correction, Children and Family, and those frontline type of essential type of state employees, we will be called back to work. So we can get the economy back moving. So as we in government are doing likewise, you as a small business owner should be taking the same note of looking at it strategically, saying we're going to look at the spikes, we're going to look at the ebb and flows of this pandemic and see what is in the best interest to help our economy on the long term, and hope for the best.
Joe, we had a question here that you, when you said being creative, re-PPP expenses. What if you could expand on that?
There is not too creative.
Now we're gonna get you in trouble.
Not too expensive. They've been very clear with your PPP. Utilities, leases, mortgage interest, not principal, which of loan debt of the company. Those are 3 very specific things that you're allowed to use in the PPP dollars. What the Paycheck Protection Plan really focuses in on is your payroll. So expenses, we understand that. I think most people would agree that I should pay my lease, I have to pay my utilities going forward, So something that, hey, Joe, can I pay, 3 months of my rent? The program, remember, is a paycheck protection plan, first and foremost. That is why we have allowed you to apply for the PPP and an EIDL, the Emergency Injury Disaster Loan Fund. And then those who have both, this is very critical to understand, that you need to understand that a part of this PPP is to pay off that EIDL as well, because you cannot double dip. You cannot request payroll on EIDL and say you used payroll on the PPP. That's very important. The way you get around that is the PPP you must spend it on the payroll. Do not use your EIDL if you have the PPP, and do both. It's going to be very confusing. You may get a little heartache when you get audited, because you will be audited after June 30th, all those who have the PPP. And so what we're saying, you always want to keep the two accounts separate, if you will. You want to concentrate it to your payroll company that run all those dollars of your loan of the PPP directly to the PPP, and exhaust your PPP through your payroll over the next 8 weeks to June 30th. Very important.
Thanks, Joe. Well, we'll start to wrap up here. We'll get a few more questions coming in, actually. Let me take a look at these. Let's see. These are all, again, reopen questions. Do our guests still have to be 6 feet apart if we create a partition between tables and cubicles? I don't know the answer for that yet, but that's a good question. I do believe that's something covered in the regulations. I mean, if I just took a common sense approach about it, if you have something that's going to block, saliva and spit being, shared and create that barrier, then I would think you wouldn't have to be 6 feet apart. And one thing I've tried to stress on this committee too is, as much in developing guidelines, we want to give guidelines for people. We also, every time you get down to another layer of detail, it brings in another question, because everyone's restaurant or store is different. The situation you have is different. And also this brings up the question of enforcement. I think enforcement's going to come down. Some of it's going to be, I almost hate to say this, but social media, in the sense that if you're not doing the right thing, your customers are probably going to point it out. The other part of it, it may come down to the towns, and maybe if you are in the restaurant industry, health department, or someone locally. But a lot of it at the end of the day comes down to you and doing what you see. Using common sense is the best way to protect your employees and customers. Let's see, another question about hair salons here. I do understand. I mean, hair salons is very close to person to person. The amount of time that you're in close proximity with someone is an issue. And I'm not the one who made the decision on adding hair salons to the May 20th date. As I said, I've heard a lot of people, and I've shared it up with the state, that almost every hair salon I've heard from does not feel ready to reopen on May 20th. The only explanation I can give you on why they decided to make that decision is that because they looked at the amount of layoffs and the economics of it. And again, I know it doesn't create a great situation for you if you decide not to reopen and someone else does, but by no means are you forced to reopen based off of the governor lifting the executive order. Dee, let me turn back to you, and any final thoughts that you have.
I'm just one question I have been getting. Some employees are saying they don't want to come back. They're making good money by not coming back, or they're fearful. And what is an employer to do? Maybe that directed to you, Joe.
That's a good question. We've gotten that question several times this week, and it's unfortunate. And many people may not like the answer I'm going to give them, but this is the part of the guidelines and under the CARES Act and what the PPP provision is providing for. For those employers that are listening, you have to be mindful that there is a fiduciary duty of receiving the PPP. It is to lessen the amount of Americans on unemployment, because it's drastically having an effect on our economy. There are more Americans on unemployment than during the Great Depression right now. That is significant. We have to be mindful of that. So what our governments are doing, our states are trying to do, is to try to, in a very systematic and health conscious way, open back our economy to get things somewhat moving. And what that really means for those small businesses to make a decision on when possibly you're open. I agree with Garrett. It doesn't mean when the government makes an announcement, hey, you guys can open May 20th, you go open May 20th. You may decide, I'm not going to open to June 1st. If that's how you feel in the best interest, you may do like I'm going to do. I'm still staying at home, to be honest with you. I want to see how there's going to be a spike in what area of the state. There's a lot of factors. I'm looking at my personal health and my family at this present time. And so I would never want to force anyone to go back. But I know from a standpoint of the Department of Labor and what the commissioners put out, it's on their website. If an employer opens back up and they feel that they want to go back with their life in order, and they offer their employees a job back on furlough, you will lose your unemployment.
Yes.
They are obligated to contact the state of Connecticut to say, I've offered all my employees or this number of employees, this is who refused and this who hasn't. And it's been clear to us, we've gotten word that your stipend of the federal government will stop and it will take you off unemployment. And it may affect your future unemployment. That is key.
That's
You
right.
have to be mindful, this may come back. This is not over if we open up. This, they say and predict, this may come back in the fall. So we have to think long-term as well as short-term. And I understand everyone's health is a concern. I wear my mask, I don my gloves every time I leave my house. And I think
Joe, I just want to be really clear on that point though. So if, let's take a hair salon. If you decide to open up and maybe just the owner decides to start working, that doesn't affect the unemployment for your employees if you have not offered them a job. And just by opening up, you don't have to go, that doesn't take them off unemployment by any means. What would take them off unemployment is if you said, I'm opening up and I want you back at work. Then if they refuse that opportunity, that's then where you would run into the situation that Joe's described.
That is correct. That's absolutely correct. And unfortunately, the sad part about it, that's the dilemma that a lot of employers are having of why they don't really want to open. They don't want to put their employers in any harm's way. And I can understand that. I'm fortunate enough, that I can take care of my own hair, but I know many women can't, and they're dying to do that. But at the same time, we're all being very health conscious. I think that's the first decision that we all should make in this country of being, what's best for our health and our family. And then secondary to that, it's the economy. And, how do we deal with the new normal and what is that? And so I think there's going to be some test cases out there. I think we should watch the news on that and watch what our state is going to put out there as far as the numbers. What do they increase, decrease? Is there more hospitalizations? Are there more deaths? What really happens after May 20th? I think we could take a little time on a little breather just to see. And I think that's why we're not fully opening the state on that date. And it's going to be a very strategic way that the Advisory Council and the governor is going to open up. And we just have citizens be mindful of that and stay tuned.
A couple questions here, and then we'll close out with Ann. But the issue we were just talking about with unemployment and having to cover your PPP loan. The PPP loan, just know this, Paycheck Protection Program, is not based on particular individuals. It's based off of what your base salary was. So if you did run into a situation where employee did not want to return, yes, you can file a claim with DOL and you can follow that through, or you can hire someone else. That you are not limited to that, because the loan is not looking at that those same individuals are back there. It's looking at that same amount of payroll. And then there's also a question about liability on businesses, and that is a big outstanding question there. I know lots of businesses are concerned. It's a point of debate in Congress right now for liability protection. The best things I could tell you right now, for a lawsuit to go forward, you have to be able to show that causation, that someone actually got the virus at your physical location. That is probably pretty difficult to do in this day and age right now. Because obviously the virus is everywhere. It would be difficult to pin down that by being at your store, that's how someone was exposed to or contracted the virus. So that would be a challenge that any attorney would have in trying to prove that case. The other part, and this is really where you can best protect yourself, is when those state guidelines come out, to the best that you can follow those. Because these cases do turn on what is called the standard of care. And are you doing what the average normal person in your position would consider to be safe and normal. And so, you know, I think you'd run into more problems if you were flagrantly not wearing masks, not cleaning things down. That's where for a potential lawsuit, and I'm a part-time lawyer, so this is not legal advice. But those are generally the types of things that that would put you in more jeopardy. So definitely you would want to follow what those guidelines are when they come out. And if you're complying with those to the best of your ability, I'm not saying that's going to give you a complete safe harbor, but that you're going to be much better protected. And
Yeah, I would agree with you. And I've heard a lot about that too, you know, where people are asking those kinds of questions. I think that these guidelines, I expect that next week we'll hear more, and we will hear more even the week after that on exactly what to expect for the reopen of the 20th of May. And, you know, I saw the release this morning, I think it was in the New Haven Register, that there's, you know, this 4-stage process, and Garrett can talk to this more eloquently probably, but that this 4-stage process is really timed between now and September 1st. But all those things can change, as we all probably guess. And I would just say, keep watching the news, keep, you know, on the COVID website for the state. But the other thing is that, you know, if you have questions, search one of us out. You know, we are available all the time on the Greater New Haven and the Quinnipiac Chambers websites. And Joe, if you want to give your email, you know, you can go ahead. But you know, there are changes that are happening. There are more guidelines that are going to come out from the SBA. So just be aware that, you know, this is a fluid situation, and we're going to get the information out to you as soon as we can.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again to our panel. We have more webinars lined up for next week, so please stay tuned. We know we're not at the end of this situation or have not solved all of the questions that you've raised, so we'll keep addressing them. Many more issues that we're going to have to confront as we go through this. But hope everyone has a great weekend, and thank you again.
And happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thanks.
You guys.